Now this is not a review video of the Sigma 18-35. There's probably like thousands of videos on YouTube about the Sigma 18-35. This is not a review video. This is just a video of why in 2022 I still have the Sigma 18-35 f1.8 rigged up on my GH5 and basically keep it on there all the time when I have my whole cinema rig set up. If you're new here, my name is Caleb and I do freelance video with the Panasonic GH5. If this is the first time you've seen one of my videos or you've been watching for a while and have not hit that subscribe button, make sure you do that now. This is a pretty old lens. It's been around for a long time, so has the GH5, but I still love this combo when shooting video. Now the first reason I still have this Sigma 18-35 rigged up to my GH5 in 2022 is just the lens specs, the overall lens specs. First of all, you have a really fast aperture at 1.8. I combine it with the Metabone Speed Booster, the 0.71 version, and that'll give you a max aperture of 1.3. And that's just as fast, if not faster, than some of the Micro Four Thirds mount lenses that you can get for the GH5. So if you want to get some shallow depth of field, that 1.3, you know, if you're using like an ND filter, a variable ND filter, you're going to get some really good shots at that 1.3 wide open. And then if I'm using this lens outdoors, which I use this lens outdoors quite a bit, I usually keep it around that f4 to f6 range, whatever aperture settings are in there. I usually keep it around that range and use the variable ND to kind of compensate for that exposure. Another thing I like about that aperture at 1.3 is for interviews. I think it's a perfect interview lens, especially at 1.3, because that 1.3 is going to give you enough depth of field, give you enough separation between the background and the person that you're interviewing. You don't want the background to get, too muddy, so that 1.3 is actually a really good aperture speed for interviews. So not only the aperture speed, but I think the focal length of the Sigma 18-35 is a really great focal length for interviews and for B-roll type shots. Now we know the Micro Four Thirds sensor is pretty small, and it's basically, if you have a 12 to 35 lens that mounts directly onto the Micro Four Thirds, it's actually going to be a 24 to 70. But with the Sigma 18-35 with the Metabone Speed Booster at 0.71, it's actually going to give you a little bit wider of an APS-C look. Now the Sigma 18-35 is actually an APS-C crop sensor lens, so technically the focal length would be kind of like a 28 to 56, but with the Metabone Speed Booster on the GH5, you're actually getting more of like a 26 to 50 look. Now you're not going to get great distance with it. It's not like a telephoto lens or anything like that, but if you are just doing some interviews and the normal B-roll type things that you would be doing, this lens is a great focal length for that type of work. So another reason I still keep the Sigma 18-35 on my GH5 Cinema Rig is just the build quality of the lens. Now this lens is actually pretty heavy, and you know what? I actually kind of like a heavier lens on my Cinema Rig because it's a little easier to handle when handheld. Sometimes if you have too light of a setup, you're going to get some of those micro jitters in your handheld footage, and I do a lot of handheld footage, and especially with this setup right here, I'm not going to put this on a gimbal or anything like that. So a lot of handheld footage, if your setup is a little too light, you might start seeing some of those micro jitters. But with a heavier setup like the GH5 and Sigma 18-35, you're able to kind of control the camera a little bit more. I will say though, it will hurt your back after a while. So if you are somebody that shoots weddings, it might be a pretty hefty setup. If you're shooting all day, you might just want to start lifting weights. Another thing I like about the build quality of this lens is that all of the components, focal length, zoom components, are all internal. So when you go to change your focal length, it's not going to shoot out the end of the lens. And this is important because on a cinema rig build like this, you're not going to want a zoom lens that, pops out the end, because you're not going to be able to have like any type of matte box on there, or even sometimes with the follow focus, that might cause some issues as well. So having all of the components internal, when you go to zoom, you'll be able to toss a matte box on there, without using those cinema lenses. You'll be able to toss a matte box on here, and it's not going to affect when you go to zoom. It's not going to pop out the end. Now this is not a weather sealed lens either, but having all of those components inside the lens is going to protect it as well. You're not going to get dust and water in that zoom part of the lens. So in that case, it kind of protects the lens a little bit, having all of those components internal. So that's something to keep in mind if you're going to be building out your own GH5 Cinema Rig, is that this this lens, you'll be able to rig it up, leave it on there, toss a matte box on, and you're not going to have any issues with the zoom, with the focus rings. So you'll be able to have it rigged up all the time. The third reason I still have this lens rigged up to my GH5 is just the picture quality. Now, if you want your image super sharp, this lens will provide that. Personally, I don't necessarily like my image super sharp. I shoot with diffusion filters, and I even have the sharpness down in my color settings. But this is a very sharp lens, and you will notice that, especially with the picture quality of the GH5. I feel like I get really good colors from this lens as well, and honestly, I don't think I've had any issue with any of the picture quality or image from this lens. Thinking back on it, I don't think I've ever had an image that I haven't liked. Then if you combine those with some of the great shoot settings that the GH5 has, like Cinema 4K, the DCI version, even the high definition variable frame rate options up to 120, you're going to get a great quality image with the Sigma 18-35 paired with the GH5. Now, there's a few things that you might want to know if you have not used the Sigma 18-35, but maybe you're kind of on the fence of getting one even in 2022 for your GH5. There's a few things that you might want to know. And the first thing is that you're going to have to adapt the Sigma 18-35 to the GH5. Now, I talked a little bit about the Metabone Speed Booster. That's the one I like using. I know Viltrox has some options. I have not used Viltrox. I can't speak to it. I don't know. I had some friends that use Viltrox. They seem to like it. But personally, I have not used any Viltrox adapters or speed boosters. I've used the Metabone Speed Booster 0.71, and that has been fantastic on this camera and lens. And like I said, this is a crop sensor lens, so you're going to want to go with the 0.71 version. The 0.64 version of the Metabone Speed Booster is actually a full frame version, so you're going to want to go with the 7.1, which is going to cut down on vignetting with the Sigma 18-35. So you're going to need to adapt this lens some way, somehow to the GH5. Now, my Sigma 18-35 is the Canon EF mount. You can get some other options, but it's pretty common to have the Canon EF mount for the Sigma 18-35. Another thing you might want if you choose to use the Sigma 18-35 is a cage and a handle. Like I said earlier in the video, this can be a pretty heavy setup. So you might want to cage it so that you can have a top handle or a side handle just for a little bit more balance. And then when you're not shooting, you can hold it like this. You don't have to hold it with two hands. It just might be a good idea to get a top handle or a side handle and a cage if you want to use the Sigma 18-35 with the GH5. Another thing to know is that there is no stabilization in this lens. Thankfully, the IBIS on the GH5 is great. And actually, if you're doing some handheld work, it actually kind of gives a pretty natural look to some of that handheld footage. So it's not a deal breaker not having that dual IBIS on this setup right here. You still get a really great image even if you're handheld. Finally, the last thing is that you might want to get the dock for the Sigma 18-35 that you can just hook right up to your computer, and you can do some of the updates for the Sigma 18-35 as well as some calibration things. It might be good to invest in that dock because it kind of future-proofs that lens a little bit, and usually it's good to run updates on things. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite lens setup is for the Panasonic GH5. I'd love to see what you're using on your GH5 to make your videos. Well, like I said, this wasn't a review of the Sigma 18-35, just me rambling about why I still like it on the GH5 in 2022 when I rig up my GH5. Well, that's all I have for this video. If you have time, maybe stick around, watch one of these videos that's popping up on your screen right here. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.